And wherever you go, you do good. Tuache hizi story nyingi. Oh, I'm sent to young people. I'm sent to women. So when they have sons, what do? Now, Joshua is an interesting guy. Now, I want you to understand the context of who Joshua is before we can discuss what Joshua did. If you don't understand who Joshua is, it is quite easy to be absorbed in his story without understanding how Joshua got there. Okay? Now, Joshua was what you would call today Moses' PA. Or if you are a pastor, you would call him your armor bearer. It's a wrong statement because the term armor bearer does not mean then what it means now. It does not mean he was a petty errand boy. Do you understand the difference between an executive PA and what pastors do to people in church today? Do you understand? The PA to the president is a very powerful person. The PA to your pastor is mostly a eunuch who's been removed of his identity and then does such menial tasks as wipe sweat and carry handbags and things like that, correct? So that's not what Joshua was. Are we on the same page? Yes. Okay, so please strip from your imagination. You cannot train someone for power and treat them like a slave. It's impossible. You understand? The only way you train someone for power is to teach them to be powerful, correct? Which is why in your house, when your mother had a house help, you grew up knowing that somehow, even though the house help was older than you, knew more than you, you knew that you had more authority than her, right? And therefore, you cannot say that you're mentoring someone and making them polish your shoes. Those two things are not related. If you're mentoring me to be an engineer, then I do engineering things. Correct? You're mentoring me to be a leader, then I do leadership things. Okay? So the church is quite wrong that the anointing is transferred by servitude. It has nothing to do with that. It is transferred by relationship. Okay? It's that simple. Your son or daughter will inherit from you because they're related to you. Correct? So the double portion is not because Elisha was subservient to Elijah. That's not why the double portion happened. Can we agree? The double portion happened because Elisha became a son to Elijah, which is proven because in the book of Malachi, it says that Elijah shall come to teach us again how to be fathers and sons. Because we don't know how to be fathers and sons, we are Democrats. Because our democratic minds is every time Uhuru Kenyatta is wrong, we rebel, right? And every time he is right, we pat him on the back. You understand? We do not know how to be sons, which is one of the key things that will be found missing in the last generation. So are we together? So Joshua is Moses's PA, correct? Now, there's something interesting that happens quite a bit in the life of Joshua. When Moses goes up the mountain, God is specific to tell him that he wants to speak to him alone, right? Strangely, who goes up with him? Okay. You realize Joshua is disobedient. Now, think about it. God has specifically said that you should come alone. But Joshua, every time God tells Moses to go anywhere alone, Joshua goes also. That is sign number one about Joshua. Sign number two about Joshua that is significant, there is a portion where Moses goes out of the tent of meeting. So he's been meeting with God. It is a private meeting between God and Moses. The moment Moses leaves the meeting, Joshua checks in. Now, that's strange because Joshua is not a priest. right? So he's not a Levite. But he's the only person in the entirety of the camp who has access to what Moses has. Think about that. Now, for most of us, we have no idea where our leaders' power comes from. In fact, we mostly do not know how our leader even gets revelation. Do we? Okay. Jesus is interesting. And Jesus and Joshua is the same name. Eh? How many disciples does Jesus take with him to Gethsemane? 3. And what is the difference between these 3 and the other 12? And what's the difference between the 12 and the 72? And more importantly, which one are you? You see, there's a multitude that followed Jesus, literally, they followed him across the waters. You know that, those guys? Right? He fed 4,000, and they told him, we will follow you wherever it is you're going. And they crossed literally oceans, unlike your high school boyfriend, and literally followed Jesus, right? And then there were the 72, right? Who followed Jesus nearly everywhere. Then there were the 12 who finally made it to the cut. Then there are 3 who make it to Gethsemane, and then there's only 1 that makes it to the cross. So which one are you? See, the multitude according to Jesus followed him for 2 reasons. There's a multitude that followed him for bread. Okay? Because like, this guy is cool. He was the guy at the bar who throws rounds. Eh? Yeah. You know there's that crowd, even in your life, right? There are those people who juayani, there's something they get from you, whether it's advice, intelligence, whatever it is that they get, there's something they get from you, right? So that thing which they get then makes them stick to you, correct? Sindio? And the day you withdraw it is the day they disappear. But there's a second, more dangerous aspect to the multitude. It's called those who seek after a sign. Okay? And they keep looking to Jesus to give them a sign. They don't know who he is until he does a sign. Which means every time that he does something that they do not like, they abandon him. Because they're looking for a sign. Right? So if Eudia is my Jesus, is my leader, and I don't like short skirts, every time she wears a short skirt, she stops being my leader until she puts on the right one. You understand? Seeking a sign. Do something to show us that you've been sent. Okay? Now, given in your life, there are people who look for those things that show us that it is you. And they relate to you based on your performance. You're doing very well. We are very close. You start faltering in anything. And they're like, I think there needs to be distance. And the problem with that is Jesus encounters this in John chapter 6. When he tells them to eat his flesh. He tells them, so bite me. Right? Yes? And they are offended. They're like, how can you turn us into carnivores? That's exactly what, you understand? We are not man-eaters. We are children of Israel. If we cannot eat unclean animals, how can you dare say that we should eat you? Right? Now, what happens is interesting. The multitude leaves, the 60 leaves, and the 12 remain. Right? And then Jesus asks a strange question. He asks the question, will you leave also? And then Peter answers something significant that then identifies the 12. They say it is not about the bread, neither is it about the signs or how we perceive. It is simply about one thing and one thing only, that you have the words of life. Key, right? Because they identify in Christ Jesus that even though for themselves they did not understand what he meant when he said, "You must eat of me," they are still aware that the man Jesus, in him are the words of life, the offense given notwithstanding. Right? And that's how they became part of the 12. Are you together? But the way you become part of the 3 is to become Jesus' friend. Now, these 3 are the same ones who see him transfigured. Correct? Right? So, you realize that for Peter, the transfiguration shocks him. And he is like, this is a big sign and we need to create a business right here. If we put 3 booths here, the temple in Jerusalem will be out of business and people will come see the latest attraction, 2 dead people and 1 alive guy shining. Right? It's a brilliant business plan, an excellent start to a religion, and the best way to take over the ancient world. Because, can you imagine if the emperor in Rome is claiming to be a god? How much more is Jesus a god if he's walking around shining? It is a sure shortcut to what Jesus came to do. Right? Because if you want to be God of this world, there's nothing better than walking around shining. Correct? So we understand that Peter is not close to Jesus because he's particularly bright. Correct? He's impetuous. He's short-tempered. He is the one whom the master says, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Right? So his closeness to Jesus is not about his perfection. In fact, Peter is the one disciple who should make you feel like you can make it. You know how Donald Trump makes you feel like you can be president? Peter is the one disciple who makes you think you can make it, because he is the racist one, he is the angry one, he's the one who's confused, he's the one who gives up, he's the one who denies Jesus 3 times. Right? So if you want hope that your failures and mistakes do not disqualify you from being a disciple and a sent one of God by that matter, Peter is your example. Right? But Peter is close to Jesus not because he is perfect, but because he is willing to be Jesus' friend. And more importantly, because Peter is willing to lay down his life for his friends, because Jesus says that after you fall away, right? So please understand, God is interesting in the sense that when Peter falls away, God sees an opportunity for him to encourage his brothers. Correct? Now, why am I relating Peter's story and the disciples' story to the disciple Joshua? Because if you do not understand the disciple Joshua, you will not understand the leader Joshua, who is the subject of our debate today. The disciple Joshua and the disciple Peter have certain things in common. First, they have tenacity. Okay? They have stickability. It's very key. Number 2 is, if you read the story of Moses, you'll realize that Moses was a very weak leader. He was a weak leader because the number of coups that Moses goes through is ridiculous. He went through about 4 or 5 of them. Okay? Those are direct coups. But the number of times the Israelites were disgruntled against him and wanted to kill him and they wanted to throw him away is huge. You understand? Every time they were at a place where there was no food, where the water was bitter, where any of them died, where they were, whatever happened, Moses was on the firing line from the Israelites, correct? But Joshua is different. Joshua is different in the sense that, number 1, when he goes into the promised land, he sees different. Everyone else sees giants, everyone else sees impossible odds, and Joshua sees the capacity that it can be done. Okay? So, number one thing you must learn from Joshua is to see different. Because it's very easy to see what everyone else sees. In fact, it is even easier to see what tradition sees. Okay? For example, it is easy to see that if you failed your KCSE, you are a failure in life. It is easy to see that. Because I am sure one of you has met one of your colleagues from primary school or high school who's working at Mjengo because he got 200 marks out of 500. Sindio? But it's easy to see that. But Joshua has a different spirit, God says of him, correct? Number two, Joshua is not afraid to get close to God. That's the kind of guy he is. That when everyone sees a legalistic God, a God who says, this line you shall not cross, don't let anyone come near the mountain, be terrified of me. Joshua sees a loving God who will not strike him dead for going near to him. It's a key thing that you must realize about Joshua. Because consistently throughout Joshua's life, you can see him drawing closer and closer to God. He develops his own relationship with God and is not afraid to cross those lines, to go be with God. Number three, Joshua is a go-getter. He's a go-getter in the sense that whether it is the promised land he's going for or the tent of meeting, whatever it is that he's going for, Joshua is not afraid to go there. Joshua understands instinctively that the kingdom of God suffers violence, and violent men lay hold of it by force. So he understands the force needed to grasp that which God has promised. Number four, Joshua is loyal. He is loyal to Moses throughout that period. You see, every time Moses made a mistake, Joshua, number one, could talk with God, right? So he could have said by his own right, I hear God too. Sindio? Joshua could have taken opportunity every time, whether it was the Levites or the Israelites or whoever stood against Moses, Joshua would have been their natural choice. Because every time they stood against Moses, they stood against Moses and Aaron, right? So the natural choice would have been who? Joshua. But not once, not when Moses marries an Ethiopian, did he raise an issue. Not once when the water was bitter. The water was bitter for Joshua too, wasn't it? Right? But not once did he complain. Not once do you see on record him questioning Moses' leadership. Now that is the man Joshua. Because one of the things that all leaders must understand, and all people of faith must understand, that if you cannot invest your trust in a leader, then leadership cannot be invested in you. You understand? Now, it's a tricky thing to learn because one of the tenets of faith is faith cannot work outside of structure. Because faith is the setting up of things under, right? How things are set up under God, correct? Yeah. We talked about this, didn't you? So you cannot ignore the setup and have the faith. Do you understand? So this man, Joshua, faithful servant for 40 years to a weak leader. And Moses was a very weak leader. Right? And I've given you examples, correct? Is now tasked with the job, the very job that Moses was unable to do. Sindio? Right? Now, I want you to see the beginning of his career. So take me to Joshua chapter 1 if you can. I think it's verse 3 when God is talking to Joshua. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' minister, okay? Moses, my servant, is dead, okay? So now arise, take his place go over this Jordan, you and all these people, into the land which I'm giving them, the Israelites. Okay? So there are a number of things. Okay? First, Moses is dead. You would expect that God would be consoling Joshua. Right? But God does not even dedicate the entire verse to Moses. Does not have the courtesy to give him a glowing eulogy. Right? Now, the first thing you must understand about being a Joshua is you must learn to move on quickly. That which you must do it. We put it another way in another verse a few sermons back when we said, when God sends you, do not go greeting neighbors. You remember that? Because a lot of the time, when you receive instructions, you spend too much time eulogizing your past job, eulogizing your past opportunity, eulogizing whatever you've lost. And because you are modern, you believe in this thing called process. It takes time, you know, and so, and I'm on a journey. Let me tell you, the Bible is very clear that when you hear the truth, do not harden your heart. Now, what is the process of hardening your heart? It is deciding that it will be a process. But don't you realize that all your life has been a process leading you to now? That you've had however many years you've lived to be ready for now. Everything God has done in your life past has prepared you for today. Otherwise, he would not speak to you unless you were ready. Hello. He will not bother. He is not a time waster. So he shows up knowing you're not ready to tell you why. That's a supreme waste of godly intelligence. Right? So if God speaks to you today, you must be ready today. You see, if you look at the life of Abraham, God speaks to him at night. What does he do first thing in the morning? Kama kungekuwa na street lights the time of Abraham, he would have done it that time. Okay? But what kind of people are we? We are the kind of people who want to spend a lot of time eulogizing the past season and finding excuses why we've not done it yet. Sindio? And you will say, you know, it takes time. Why haven't you started your business? I'm still writing my business plan. A lot of time, what you do is you spend a lot of time on the death of Moses and not so much on what tasks need to be done. You understand? Because the death of Moses is a significant thing. Because there are matters of, okay, how do I handle the handover of power? How do I handle these people who he has left me with? How am I now taking authority? Should I get the elders together? Should I have an anointing service? There are many plans to be done before you take over the leadership of nearly 4 million people. The death of Moses is not something that, humanly speaking, you just step in. It's been 40 days I am here. God has told me, right? But God is not interested in the details that you want to measure in. Because the very nature of what God is asking you to do has to be heard. Otherwise, why is he God in your life? If God showed up to tell you to do easy things, why do you need him? Why is he telling you? The very nature of your call is to kill you. Do you understand? You are called to be killed by that thing God has called you to do. Trust me when I tell you this. There's nothing that will destroy you more than what God is calling you to do. So sitting and describing how difficult it is, you're not doing yourself a favor. Because I have learned one thing of God. The things I am mostly prepared to deal with, he never brings my way. Now, have you ever noticed that? You see, when I did a certain documentary last year, and everyone told me I'd be sued and I'll be stoned and all these things. So I talked to my lawyers, I talked to my media friends, and I was ready. I was like, these guys are coming for me, I am ready. They never came. Because, listen, it's called a weapon fashioned against you. It is not a weapon you're prepared for. Otherwise, how can it be fashioned against you? For it to be against you and for it to be effective, you've got to have no armor against it of your own. God and the devil are not playing trisex that they send you challenges that are easy for you to overcome. It's a waste of resource. Can we agree? Let's understand that the process of obeying God's call in your life needs you to prepare to have faith, because every challenge that will come your way is not the one you anticipate. Spending time eulogizing Moses is not something God does. So stop this nonsense of process and things like that. My friend, you'll never be ready to start a business, never be ready for any of these things you're supposed to do. You'll never be ready. The best way to do business is to get going. The best way to change your life is to get going. Just do it. You understand? Because if you are able to write a business plan now, that tells me you're not stupid. Sindio? So clearly you have the wherewithal to assess your risks and your opportunities and things like that, right? So get cracking. Now listen, a few things that he says. Go over this Jordan, you and all these people, into the land which I'm giving to them, the Israelites. And he's giving him a task. Then he says, every place upon which the sole of your foot shall tread, that I have given to you as I promised Moses. Now, a few things. God promised who? Not Joshua. So you understand why the relationship is important. Okay? Because a lot of us have solo missions. Purpose is nested. Purpose is nested. In other words, your purpose and my purpose intertwine, and it intertwines with another person's and things like that, right? So this is why it is dangerous to keep dropping relationships. Because 99% of the time, you will give God the task to go look for someone else to have done the purpose you missed because you stopped being friends with Gaston. There's a certain grace in each other that we have, that for as long as that person is there, certain things do not worry you. You understand? Because they have a natural ability, even when they're there, that you know. Have you ever had a friend who, when the cops stop you, you just let him talk? And somehow you know it will be fine. You understand? Now, this is the reason why we keep relationship. We don't keep relationship because of the people. We keep relationship because of the God in them. You understand? And God can dwell in very weird places. Generally. Yeah. I have found God. One day I was on a TV debate and there was a Muslim sheikh. And I listened to that guy and I thought, I can hear God. Guy is Muslim. Muslim completely. A problem with most of us is we do not realize that all of creation declares the glory of the risen Lord. And so you want to choose how the thing that God uses to reach you looks like, talks like, acts like. So it's very key that you need to understand that actually how you become great, and let me now give you a hint of what we discussed on Saturday, is this: that the kingdom of God and inheritance works like this. Okay? Your father makes 20 million shillings. You inherit 20 million, right? Your job is not to spend 20 million. Your job is to turn it into 100 million. And then your son takes over, right? So each generation in God is supposed to start higher. It's basic understanding. That's how dynasties work, right? Now, the problem with us is we are not dynastic in our thinking. Each one of us wants our promise, our call, our ministry, right? So with my promise, my call, my ministry, bye, I've got my thing. But you see, you're building wrong. If you want to build greatness, then you take that which someone else has built and then you add value to it, and that's how the glory of the latter church is greater than the former. It is not some magic. It is not God will pour out more Holy Spirit, because he can't. It is that you finally learn that if I want a career in banking, so formal. Yeah? If I want a career in banking, then the easiest thing is to build on what Gaston has built. You understand? Now, the problem with us is you're forever in foundations. You're forever digging your own foundation. It's a problem. Because you're always starting, aren't you? Yeah, you're starting a business, starting. So you have to learn everything afresh. Because you need to understand that the promise does not necessarily need to be yours. No, so the simple question I'd ask you is, whose promise are you living out? Whose prophecy have you inherited? Whose promise? See, part of the reason the church is poor, it's basic mathematics. The English are wealthy because they've been able to cultivate wealth across generations, right? All right. Now you in your family, oh, there's one person who's very happy, right? And it feels good, right? Not to start with the hoi polloi. The hoi polloi ni watu hoe hai. So a lot of the time, because of how quickly we sever relationships, okay, we have to build from scratch. You understand? Okay, let me give you an example. How does Safaricom work? Safaricom works because they understand that there is a commercial director who has grace for commerce, right? And they have a finance director who's got grace for finance, right? And they've got all these people with different graces who work together for a common goal. Now, in them, there's a guy who's building his career. There's a guy who is going to university. There's all of these people in one vision, right? So what you need to understand is this so-called purpose which you pursue with such great zeal, 99.9% of the time is nested in someone else's. Are we together? Paul puts it like this, that I planted, Apollos watered, but God is the one who gives increase. Now my question is, wewe ndio planter, wewe ndio waterer, alafu wewe ndio harvester, and even the market. Do you see how mad you are? You see, if you do not learn to build with relationship, whatever you've built has already failed. Oh, I can prove it to you. Just catch a flu. Then, everything you've built is gone. So you must learn, like Joshua, that purpose is not necessarily my purpose. It's a very ridiculous statement, by the way. Now, another thing I must tell you is Christians have been praying barefoot for too long. Yes, you go around town claiming it for God. Yes, you are supremely insane. Because Joshua was never barefoot. Let's start there. One. When God says, every place your foot shall tread, in verse 4, he explains where. He says, from the wilderness and this Lebanon to the great river Euphrates. So, my friend, if Joshua stepped foot in Africa, he would have died. Because he had no mandate in Africa. So the other thing you must know is the boundaries of your authority. Because when you take it as carte blanche, you will begin to fight wars that will swallow you. You must know where your battle is. You must know its boundaries. So these people will tell you name and claim. It does not work like that. God has gone before you to a specific place, not everywhere. When God tells him, I've gone before you, he knows there is a boundary within which God has gone. So you got to Lewana? Now, please understand, that boundary is not cars and shambas and things like that, because that's how you think, maybe I'm not supposed to own a mansion. It does not matter. It does not matter. If a doctor comes to treat you and you're very sick, will you ask him where he lives? Does it bother you? So I don't know where this false parallel of maybe God doesn't want me to own a car came from with your purpose. God is interested in you doing what he sent you to do. He's not interested in what you do it in. Or where you sleep while you're doing it. You think my someone is affected whether I slept in a 5-star hotel last night or a 2-star or at Karumaindo Bar and Lodging? Is God going to judge my someone today and say, based on where you slept? It does not matter. God has no problem with your luxury or lack thereof. It is a non-issue to him. Amen. There are two sides. Hear me correctly. He does not care whether you are in luxury or in poverty, because Paul expects and says that you need to have learned to be content whether you are lifted or you are abased. The boundaries of what you're supposed to do are not boundaries of wealth. Because the biggest boundary you have in your head, maybe God meant me to be a 10 millionaire, a 30 million. Those are the boundaries. Those are nonsense boundaries. God's boundaries are to the purview of who you're supposed to serve. Are we together? So don't tell me God sent me to be a doctor in Kenya. My friend, nonsense. God expects you to be a doctor in Australia, in hell, in heaven, everywhere God expects you to be. So this idea, I am sent to youth, to do what? There is no such thing. You are simply sent. And wherever you go, you do good. Tuache hizi story nyingi. Oh, I'm sent to young people. I'm sent to women. So when they have sons, what do? You are sent to people. Stop specifying it. Because you have no idea. I'll give you an example. There's a hospital that was started and was called the Nairobi Women's Hospital. Sindio? Okay. A number of problems. First of all, there is Nairobi Women's Hospital, Nakuru. Nairobi Women's Hospital, Mombasa. So Nairobi ni shida. Then ukienda, that women's hospital, it has a men's. Okay. But that's what we keep doing. We want to limit the scope of God to your own desires. Number two, stop looking to your past to determine where you're going. Because if Joshua looked at his past, he would have said, I am a professional wilderness counselor. Are you going through the wilderness? Call Joshua. I have gone through the wilderness, and therefore my ministry shall be called Escape the Wilderness International. You understand? So stop this idea of defining for God where you are going based on your past. Oh, I struggled through depression. Now I help people cope with depression. Nigga, what? Listen. Leave the wilderness where it is. Because who God has called you to deal with might not necessarily have anything to do with your past experience. You understand? God is the one who sets your boundaries. You do not set them yourself. So stop this youth, my past, or I'm a single mom, or I am a single dad. Kwanza single dads, hey my friend, if a man raises children, we will never hear the end of it. Huh? Super dad, dad of the year, my friend. So God is the one who sets your, and the boundaries are futuristic, they're not based on your past. Because sometimes the skills you gathered in the wilderness are completely useless in the promised land. Because in a land that is flowing with milk and honey, your ability to call quail to fall on the ground is very useless. And he says, no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Now, you see that statement again, if you read it in English, it is a big lie that God told him. Because I know of very many people who stood against Joshua. Do you understand? So people standing against you is very different in God's mind than in yours. It's two different issues. As I was with Moses, so I will be with. Yeah, so please be careful relationships. As I was with, so I will be. Yeah, so if you don't know how he was with Moses. Do you understand the importance of relationships? You know. And I'm teaching you about faith. Because faith is caught. That's why I keep talking about the Moses-Joshua dynamic. Peter learned faith by looking at Jesus do it. That's why they were the disciples. Because they saw Jesus do it. It is the relationship they had with Jesus, not the revelation they had, that made them who they are. And the funny thing is that as a church, we are so distant from each other that you do not know how God is with some. You don't know his story. You don't know where Sam went to high school. You do not know how he survived in campus, do you? You do not know how he came from a village boy to the man he is. You don't know. So when God comes and tells you, I will be with you the way I was with Sam when you're in second year, it's a very confusing statement. That's why God is called the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Are we together? God is generational. That's why he's called some to be teachers. Because it's not the best way to learn. This is not the best way to learn. The best way to learn, by the way, is to learn by living life with someone. That was the original desire. That's why Christ said, go and make disciples. Not classes, not crusades, not churches. Disciples. Kini kwa sisi bangi yetu ni nyingi, we assume that standing in front of people and speaking is making disciples. No. It is actually making disciplers, not disciples. In fact, out of the room I'm looking at, there are very few disciples of mine. Very few. And I can tell you, it's very easy to prove whether you're a disciple. Where is my tent of meeting with God? Where is that place I live and you enter? You understand? It's a relationship. That's what Christ called us to do. And it is in that relationship that you begin to see how God works in someone and for someone. And then you're able to understand when he says, as I was with, so will I be with you. That's how you grow faith. Faith is relational. That's how it's learned. And that's why Peter says, if it is really you, Master, then bid me to come. Then what happens? For as long as his eyes are on Christ, he is fine, right? There you go. That's why Paul says, follow as I follow Christ. It is not a statement of righteousness. You understand? It is a statement of a walk. And a walk is different from righteousness. You know, Christians are the funniest people. They'll tell you, my walk with God is going well. Okay? Their walk is, I don't smoke, I don't drink. That's not a walk. That's not doing stuff. A walk is the things that you've done in God, despite all those things. There's a book, many books have been written about so-called God's generals, right? And what you'll find very interesting is they did great things despite great weaknesses. All of them. But you see, it is easy to forget that walking is about a doing. It's about achieving something. It's easy to forget that. So here, what God is referring to, because if God was referring to Moses' walk in terms of marrying Ethiopians, then the first thing Joshua should have done is marry an Ethiopian. What we would expect is that Israel should have been infected with Moses' character. So that's what we know, right? And similarly, Israel should have been infected with David. Are we together? By the way, can I explain Solomon to you? I know you guys think he was very promiscuous. He wasn't. Just wait. Wait. Solomon was a coward. That was his problem. Solomon never went to war. And in the ancient world, if you don't go to war, what do? You marry from every tribe. Now, be strong and of good courage, for you shall cause these people to inherit the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Okay? Now, please note that the objective of any leader is for the people to inherit. It is not him. You will cause the people to inherit. So the labor of a preacher is to cause you to walk into your rest. Are we together? I can teach that, but that's not part of our faith series, all right? But what God keeps saying, only you be strong and very. Now, notice that the courage is Joshua's, not Israel's. That you may do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded. Now, these are problems. What Moses commanded or what God commanded? You see, you must understand the power of relationship in our transactions with faith. You understand? Turn not from me to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. Now, let me explain this thing. Honor your father and mother, and it shall be well. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It is the same. Because one of the things that we don't understand about leadership, even Uhuru Kenyatta's leadership, as flawed as it is that God literally is obliged to give him the blueprint of 50 million Kenyans. He has it. I don't like him. Might make a lot of mistakes, but he has it. A wise son knows how to get it. Because a wise son knows how to deal with a drunk father. Are you seeing the character of Joshua? Right? Because by the time he's able to deal with Jericho, he is all these things God is talking about. Right? Now, I want to go. There's be strong, be courageous, and it's repeated many times. Now I want us to go to Jericho. So take me there. I want us to look at the instructions that God gives the children of Israel. Right? Because this is an interesting dilemma. Number one, the children of Israel have never, in about, they were established 470 years before this date, they had never participated in siege warfare. In fact, they were builders and masons and cattle keepers and shepherds throughout their time in Egypt, right? The wars that they had survived in the wilderness was skirmish wars, okay? These guys, by the time they're getting here, they're just freshly circumcised, okay? And interestingly, manna had ceased the day they crossed. So, manna has ceased. There's no cloud or pillar anymore. Everything is different. So different is it that Joshua's first change, Moses sent out 12 spies. Joshua sent out 2. Which is a lesson in leadership I should hold a conference and charge for. I'm joking. We'll discuss that one day. So what is key to understand? Where are we? I don't want the spies. Go back to the presentation. You have the scriptures there. So I want you to look at God's strategy for siege warfare. Now, siege warfare, to capture a city, if you've watched movies, was the most difficult thing, right? Now you can imagine you are facing a gilded city and you have nothing other than a tabernacle, a few Levites, and Joshua. Now, a lot of the time when you're starting your journey to God, you will find that you're looking at something impossible that to you no one else has ever done, and you've got to somehow break it down. Okay? Now Jericho, a fenced town with high, was tightly closed because of the Israelites. No one went out or came in. And the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have given Jericho, its king, and mighty men of valor into your..." Okay, now a lot of the time when you hear that, your assumption is we'll walk over to Jericho and say, "Keys, please," right? So that's what you usually think. Especially when you say, "I receive." Your loan is paid, right? Amen. Right? And you wake up the next day and you go check your account and your loan is still negative. Correct? Now, you must always listen to God beyond that point. Because usually what you think you've had is not. Because your brain has the tendency to fill in the gaps. You've noticed this by now. God promises you one thing, you thought it was A, then it turned out to be B. Cynthia? You shall march around the enclosure. You shall march around the enclosure, all the men of war, going around the city once. This you shall do for 6 days. So you must go around the city once, so that you are able to see how tall it is, how impregnable it is, so that you get a full scope of how big the problem is. A lot of the time, the reason you do not take journeys with God is because you've not learned to do what Jesus said. Count the cost. You've never done it. A lot of the time, you watch Masterclass on TV, you're like, hey, I want to go to Masterclass, pause. Count the... This idea that you begin to put your hands to the plow, and then you turn back. Jesus said you're not worthy of the kingdom. Are you together? Now, I know you think sin makes you unworthy of the kingdom. But Paul, if you think so, actually what makes you unworthy of the kingdom is your unwillingness to plow. Set your hands to the plow. You must count the cost. God is not interested in your half-indulgence. So before he does anything with you, he expects that you've counted the cost. If you don't count the cost, then the weight of it at some point will break you. In the kingdom, if you say, I choose to be your friend, in effect what you're saying, I choose to die on your behalf should the need ever arise. Because greater love knows no man than this, and to lay down his life for. Count the cost. You see, the Christians of today, they go around Jericho, see one problem, quit. Go around Jericho, get to one offense, quit. Go around Jericho, see how big the problem is, quit. So, for 6 days, we shall march around it. All the men of war. This you shall do for 6. Why the men of war? Because they must consider what the challenge is. They must think about it before they accept the mission. It's like Mission Impossible. The mission ahead of you, should you accept it? A lot of the time, just people in gear for, especially kwanza when a Christian promises you they will support your ministry. Let me tell you for free, the moment you promise, your finances shall be attacked. I guarantee you. There will always be more problem than money to make sure what you've promised shall not happen. Hey, are we together? So always count the cost.